G'day, Richard Harris out in the dive shed, and thanks again for joining the Real Risk Dive channel. Today I want to talk about primary lights. We've had a bit of a chat about backup lights in the past, but now I want to help you choose the best primary light for your money. Now, of course, it depends what you've got in mind, whether you're cave diving, whether you're going to be deep inside a wreck, or just searching a reef, looking underneath the ledges for a crayfish or two, or maybe planning a night dive. And I guess the requirements for some of these dives are all a little bit different. I mentioned in my previous video on backup lights that some of these new backup lights are so reliable, so strong and bright and clear that really for a reef dive where you just want to have a look around, or a night dive, most of these will do the job, to be honest. Searching for a crayfish under a ledge, 850 lumens for this Scuba Pro 850R, fantastic light and really robust and good value. But if you're going to go a bit deeper, a bit further afield, and you need a bit more duration and a bit more power, then you'll need a proper primary light. And depending on the duration of the dive, you'll either need one big one with some backup lights as well, of course, to get you home in the event of a failure, or you might need even more than one primary light. So what sort of stuff is available? Before we talk about the specifics of the lights though, it's worth having a little chat about lighting technology and in particular LEDs, because things have changed so much since even when I started cave diving and exploring wrecks. You know, we were relying on halogen bulbs, which were totally unreliable. They would often break. Certainly if you dropped your light, that would be the end of your bulb. And the burn times on them were terrible. The amount of light output was shocking. And the light was a horrible yellow color with, a really warm color temperature. So just to show you a couple of the old relics out of the shed, Dive-Rite actually made some great stuff back in the day, and they still do. Most of us were using Dive-Rite lights if we hadn't built them ourselves. Things like this, the test tube light, it's got a test tube covering a halogen bulb. This one had a very tricky focusable beam, so this was like a primary narrow beam light, but you could also add your video reflectors to these sort of lights. And of course, to power them, we were using massive sealed lead acid batteries, usually 7 amp hour or 14 amp hour, two of them doubled up. These things were big and heavy. You could take some weights off your belt. The other things we were using with those sealed, I think they're dichroic bulbs. Again, they're halogen, maybe 20 or 40 watts, and very unreliable and pretty low power output. So getting through the dive with a working light was, sometimes a bit tricky. And backup lights were also pretty weak and poor. They were halogen, and you often had to rely on them to get you home. So we're very, very much spoilt for choice these days. Now, in terms of selecting your primary light, it's very easy to be led down the path of finding the most powerful light that money can buy. And of course, it is nice to have the brightest light in the water when you try to rev up your mates a little bit. But choosing the brightest light is actually not always as easy as you might think. It's not just a matter of looking at some of the specs that you'll read on paper. For example, the power output of the light in watts, whether it's a 20 watt or a 30 or a 40 watt LED, doesn't necessarily tell the full story. For example, the quality of the reflecting mechanism and the way it's being transmitted is important in terms of how much light is actually projected out forwards out of the light head. So better than just looking at the wattage, which of course is a guide if all other things are equal, it's also important to look at the number of lumens that the light will produce. Now, the lumens are the amount of light being produced at the source of the LED chip. And of course, if you have a very tightly focused primary light, which is excellent for signaling underwater, for example, to catch the attention of your dive buddies, or to look further down the passage of the wreck or the tunnel in the cave, then that light will be focused in a small spot and will have a very high intensity at that point. But if the same bulb is reflected into a big wide spread, such as in a video light, then of course it won't appear as bright to the eye, but it'll give a much greater coverage. Now the lumen output from the light itself is the same, but what's important perhaps is the amount of light striking the target, and that is measured in lux. So lux is the number of lumens per square meter. So in other words, widespread beams will appear less intense, but will give you more coverage, and courage is what you need in the cave. a very tight beam light will have a higher lux rating for the same amount of lumens potentially. So you just need to understand what you're looking at when you're reading the specs, and sometimes just holding up the two lights in the dive shop, shining them on the wall, will give you the best impression. The other thing to think about is duration, and that will depend on obviously the wattage of the globe, or the LED in this case, but also the size of the battery pack in terms of watt hours or amp hours, that the capacity of the battery. Now, I would say, to be honest, that of the primary lights that I use, most of them have a number of different settings of power, and it's very rare that I use anything except the lowest power. So power or potency of the light itself is one of the least important things to me, as long as it is bright enough to see what I need to see. And most of the lights we're going to talk about are certainly strong enough for that. So I would only flick things up to full power just briefly to either have a look down a tunnel or to try and catch the attention of one of my mates underwater. So don't be too obsessed about the power of the light per se. Look at all the other stuff: duration, what sort of beam are you looking for, narrow, medium, or flood like a video light, and also the build strength. You know, what do you need to do with your light? Are you going to try and dive it to 200 meters, in which case you're going to need something fairly robust? And to be honest, there aren't that many products on the market for that sort of diving, which is a problem for people like myself. Or, you know, if you're diving up to, say, 100 meters, then pretty much all the products that are available will be okay for that job. Now, there's a large number of brands in the market, but just to name a few of the really trusted and reliable ones, Halcyon obviously makes some fantastic lights. Dive Right still making great lights. Big Blue I'm particularly fond of, although they're not without some problems, particularly at depth. Underwater Light Dude make fantastic video lights, but also make really good primary lights. So the next thing to consider is, what style of light do you prefer? And I guess there are now two broad categories of light. Canister light, similar to what we were using with our old halogen technology, and that means a battery pack with a cable to the light head, which you would place on your hand usually. Or more recently and more commonly, a lot of divers are adopting hands-free or handheld lights, such as this one from Dive Right, the LX20 Plus, and this one from Big Blue. So obviously no cable coming out, no battery pack. The battery is self-contained inside the light. And although the light is consequently slightly bigger and maybe a bit more unwieldy, once you're in the water, personally I feel like the trade-off is well worthwhile. You really don't notice the light on the back of your hand, even though it looks a bit big and bulky. But if you compare it to, you know, some of the older lights that we would have similarly on a bracket on the back of your hand, it really wasn't too much different. Some of the Halcyon lights, which still have the big ballast on them, are very much bigger than this still, and they're canister lights. So it's really horses for courses. My job's not to tell you what to do, but just tell you what's available, and you know what my preferences are and what the reasons for that are. So these are the handheld lights. No cable, no battery pack, no separate battery pack. If you look at something like this one, this is quite a big battery pack from Light Monkey, who's the other brand I should have mentioned. They make fantastic quality products, and they've been long time makers of canister lights, and more recently they are also starting to make a hands-free light or handheld light. This is a 20 amp hour battery pack with lithium polymer batteries inside, so it's a really good strong a really good sized battery pack, and will basically run a light all day. And I also have used it a lot for heating inside my dry suit to sustain that. A couple of clips of any description on the battery pack means that you can clip it off to your butt for side mount diving, for example. Some people will attach them to the side of a cylinder if they're wearing back mounts or a rebreather. You can wear them on the side of your tanks. A lot of companies now are making a right-angled cable adapter, so the cable comes out the top, which again is really nice for side mount diving. It's a more streamlined way for the cable routing. This particular light has not a homemade light head, but it's a deep rated light head made for me by Ron Allen in Sydney, who creates amazing technology, including very deep equipment for submersibles and so forth. So at myself and Craig Challenge request, he made these lights for us, which are 60 watt LEDs, and they're quite a wide beam, so they're suitable for for video, and they're rated to 500 meters, so should certainly do the job for our exploration in the Pierce resurgence. And they are indeed very strong lights and should survive anything that we can throw at them. So that's what a canister light looks like. That's what the handheld lights look like. The other thing I want to just mention briefly is the batteries themselves in these lights. So I really love the Big Blue lights because they make these quad packs of 18650 batteries. They are 50 watt hours. They're plain travel friendly, but they're really easy to put on a charger as a block of 4, pop into the light, screw it back together, and you're on your way again. I own a heap of these batteries because I also use them in the Big Blue video lights, which I love. The Dive Right light comes with a carriage like this with 4 18650 batteries, but they're all separate, so you have to pop them out and pop them back in and charge them separately before you put them back in the light, which I find a bit annoying, to be honest, compared to the ease of the one-stop shop with the Big Blues. My dog is scratching at the door, I'm sorry. The other thing to think about is the activation, the switch basically of the light. Now the Dive Right light has a big magnetic collar around it, and so you just sort of click it to the center, click it off again, and if you do that quickly it'll go from high to low power, and eventually into strobe mode, which runs for 24 hours or something. This is a 1500 lumen light at high power, so it's not particularly powerful. The Big Blue light that I'm using here is 4800 lumens, but this is a slightly broader spread. These are very, very good in the water. They've got a real good bit of poke. But as I've mentioned in previous videos, the Big Blue lights, the button gets pressed at pressure, and it can often go into a flashing strobe mode, which is extremely disruptive and hazardous, to be honest, during deep dives. So I don't take these anything much past 80 meters. And this one, although I haven't dived it much, I think it's showing a lot of promise for deeper dives. I mean, the thing about primary lights is you don't necessarily have to carry them on your hands. I will often use primary lights on a helmet if I'm sump diving. I've got the Skurian, the Phaethon, and the old Sten light, which is not particularly waterproof, but the other two are really good, to 200 meters or more. So it depends what you're planning to do. I like having lights on my helmet if I'm doing certain things like surveying, collecting invertebrates in the caves, all those sorts of things. And it's not a bad place to store backup lights and videos. Helmets are another topic, very controversial in some sectors, but something we can talk about in another video. The final thing to talk about is the Goodman Handle. Now the Goodman Handle, invented by Bob Goodman, I believe. He was one of the early adopters of the Hogarthian system, invented by Bill Main. And the true Goodman handle is actually a hard metal handle, basically a rectangular shape with the top where the light is, and adjustable up and down so you can get your hand in there and make it tight around your hand. The advocates of the hard Goodman handle say that it will sit nicely on your hand. It's adjustable for glove size, dry gloves, whatever. And the beauty of it is that if you're scootering, for example, with your right hand and you need to change or adjust something with your left hand, rather than ending up sort of waving your light hand around everywhere, which will upset your dive buddies and make them think that you've got some kind of problem going on, you can actually just move it over and hold it in your scooter hand whilst you do whatever adjusting or changing you need to, and then come back and slide it back on quite easily. With these soft handles, they're very comfortable, I find, when they're on. The better and newer ones are also pretty solid. They don't flop around too much on your hand, and also very easily adjustable underwater, but it is a lot harder to make that transfer, especially if you've got a thick glove on from one hand to another. Now, we're maybe not quite so hot on that topic of adversely signaling your buddies and getting told off by each other. So in a nutshell, that's the pros and cons. The Goodman handles, hard, soft, carrying your lights on your scooter if you need to. That's how we do a lot of our exploration when we're doing deep dives. It's really good not to have a cable running around as an extra entanglement point. In fact, we don't wear any lights on our hands at all for the super deep dives, just because that's one thing we can eliminate from the equation in terms of hazards, entanglement points, and so forth. So, and the last thing we want is a light imploding on the back of your hand during a deep dive as well. So we carry plenty of backup lights, but the main primary lights for us are video lights on the scooters. Lots of ways to skin a cat. Hope you found this useful. If you did, please subscribe, send me a comment, ask me any questions you have, and we'll see if we can get around to sorting them out. Thanks very much.